Listen to me carefully. There are moments in life when something unseen shifts, when the air around your destiny changes, when the ordinary rhythm you have been living by suddenly breaks, and you realize you have stepped into a higher realm of awareness. This is not coincidence. This is not emotion. This is not imagination. This is the moment you unlocked the impossible frequency. The moment when God allowed your spirit to tune into what others cannot hear, see, or understand. Many live their entire lives surrounded by divine possibilities, yet remain deaf to them. But you, something awakened in you, something aligned, something opened. And once this frequency is unlocked, life can never return to what it was before. God has always spoken, but not everyone has been listening. God has always been moving, but not everyone has been aligned. There are frequencies in the natural world, and there are frequencies in the spiritual realm. You do not stumble into them by accident. You unlock them by faith, by obedience, by hunger, and by refusal to accept limitation as your final reality. The impossible frequency is not reserved for the elite, the famous, or the powerful. It is reserved for those who dare to believe that God is greater than what their eyes can see, greater than what their past has declared, greater than what their circumstances try to enforce. Many people live trapped in a low frequency of fear, doubt, regret, and survival. Their thoughts vibrate with lack. Their words echo defeat. Their expectations are shaped by disappointment. But God never designed you to live there. God created you to resonate with heaven's authority, heaven's confidence, heaven's boldness. When you unlock the impossible frequency, your inner language began to change. You stopped asking, "Is this possible?" and started declaring, "If God has spoken, it must come to pass." That shift alone terrifies limitation, because limitation survives only where faith is silent. There is a reason resistance increased when you began to rise. There is a reason confusion tried to surround you when clarity was forming within you. Every time God elevates a person into a higher frequency, the old systems panic, the old patterns shake, the old. But understand this, resistance is not proof you are wrong. Resistance is proof you are moving into territory that once belonged to fear. God never calls a person upward without shaking what cannot follow them. When you unlock this frequency, certain doors close not to punish you, but to protect you from staying small. God works by alignment, not by chance. When your thoughts align with divine truth, when your words align with divine authority, when your actions align with divine timing, something powerful happens within you. You stop begging for miracles and start expecting movement. You stop waiting for permission and start walking with conviction. The impossible frequency is not about noise. It is about precision. It is not about effort. It is about agreement. The moment you agree with what God has already decided, the impossible begins to recognize your voice. Some will misunderstand you now. Some will say you have changed. They are right, you have. You no longer resonate with despair. You no longer entertain hopeless conversations. You no longer shrink to make others comfortable. When God elevates your frequency, You cannot pretend to be what you once were. You cannot speak the same way. You cannot dream the same size. You cannot tolerate the same excuses. This is not pride. This is alignment. Humility does not mean denying what God has placed within you. Humility means stewarding it with obedience and courage. God does not release vision without responsibility. The higher the frequency, the greater the discipline required to maintain it. You cannot live carelessly and expect to walk in divine precision. You cannot feed fear and expect faith to dominate your inner world. What you allow into your spirit determines what you amplify. Guard your thoughts, guard your words, guard your expectations. The impossible frequency is sensitive. It responds quickly to faith and just as quickly to doubt. But when you remain anchored in God, nothing can destabilize what has been divinely tuned. There are things God has already finished that you are only now beginning to perceive. Time does not limit God. Distance does not restrict God. History does not intimidate God. What seems delayed to you has been strategically timed. When you unlocked the impossible frequency, you stepped into divine timing, not human urgency. Now you must learn patience without losing passion, stillness without surrendering belief, and trust without demanding explanation. God does not owe you understanding before manifestation. Faith does not require full visibility to move forward. The impossible frequency rewires how you interpret struggle. You stop seeing obstacles as walls and start recognizing them as signals that you are close to breakthrough. Pressure no longer means collapse. It means expansion. Silence no longer means abandonment. It means preparation. God often quiets the noise around you so you can hear the instructions within you. This is where many lose confidence, but this is where those aligned with God gain clarity. When nothing outside confirms you, the voice of God within becomes louder. You must understand that faith is not passive. Faith is an active force that shifts realities. Every declaration rooted in God carries weight. Every decision made in obedience carries momentum. The impossible frequency responds to certainty, not wishful thinking. God does not respond to desperation. God responds to trust. When you stand firm without visible proof, when you speak life where others see decay, when you move forward while logic demands retreat, heaven recognizes your alignment. There are moments when God isolates you not because you are forgotten, but because you are being refined. Not everyone can handle the frequency you now carry. Some relationships would distort it. Some environments would drain it. Some conversations would corrupt it. God removes distractions before releasing acceleration. Loneliness is not always loss. Sometimes it is divine protection. When God wants to elevate your impact, God first deepens your roots. You may feel stretched, challenged, even uncomfortable. That is because growth does not ask for permission. It demands surrender. The impossible frequency dismantles old identities. It confronts the version of you that learned to survive instead of reign. God did not bring you this far to keep you hidden, silent, or uncertain. God is calling you to operate with authority, not arrogance, with confidence, not fear, with boldness, not hesitation. What you focus on multiplies. When you focus on limitations, you empower them. When you focus on God, you activate supply beyond comprehension. Faith is not pretending difficulty does not exist. Faith is declaring that difficulty does not have the final word. God is not intimidated by complexity. God specializes in situations that human reasoning labels impossible. The frequency you unlocked was designed precisely for environments where logic fails and faith prevails. Now your responsibility is to remain consistent. Do not downgrade your expectation because of temporary delay. Do not silence your conviction because of external noise. Do not retreat because results have not yet manifested. Alignment requires endurance. God does not abandon what God initiates. If this frequency was unlocked within you, it is because you were trusted with it. God does not entrust power to instability. God does not release vision to indecision. There will be moments when you must encourage yourself without applause. Moments when obedience feels lonely. Moments when faith feels heavy. But remember this, the same God who elevated your frequency sustains it. You are not carrying this calling alone. Divine strength flows where divine purpose exists. When exhaustion whispers that you cannot continue, remember that God does not call you to rely on your own strength. Yielding is not weakness, it is alignment. Your past no longer has authority over your future. The impossible frequency overrides old labels, old failures, old limitations. God is not consulting your history to decide your destiny. God is responding to your faith now. Every step taken in obedience recalibrates your reality. Every moment of trust deepens your access. You are not waiting for permission, you are walking in agreement. The world may try to pull you back into familiar patterns, but you cannot unhear what God has revealed. Once the frequency is unlocked, silence becomes impossible. Vision demands movement. Conviction demands action. Faith demands expression. Do not dilute what God has concentrated within you. Do not compromise clarity for comfort. The price of alignment is often is understood, but the reward is transformation beyond explanation. Stay vigilant, stay grounded, stay surrendered. The impossible frequency is not about proving anything to anyone. It is about honoring what God has activated within you. Walk forward with reverence and courage. Speak with authority and humility. Act with boldness and patience. You are not chasing destiny. Destiny is responding to your alignment. God is not distant. God is present, active, and intentional. What has been unlocked cannot be reversed. What has been revealed cannot be unseen. What has been activated cannot be ignored. Live accordingly, think accordingly, speak accordingly, move accordingly. The impossible frequency responds to those who refuse to live beneath what God has spoken. Those who dare to believe that divine truth outweighs visible evidence. Those who remain faithful even when the path unfolds one step at a time. Those who understand that alignment with God is not a moment, but a way of living, breathing, trusting, and becoming. And as you continue to walk in this frequency, every limitation will eventually recognize that it no longer has jurisdiction over who you are becoming in God. There is a deeper dimension to this frequency that many never explore because it demands honesty before it grants authority. God does not elevate a voice that refuses to listen. When you unlock this frequency, you entered a realm where excuses no longer survive. Every hidden motive is exposed. Every divided loyalty is confronted. Every shallow belief is stripped away. This is not to condemn you, but to free you. God never reveals truth to crush a person. God reveals truth to rebuild them with integrity and strength that cannot be shaken. You are learning that faith is not merely what you say in moments of comfort, but what governs you in moments of pressure. The impossible frequency tests your inner alignment before it changes your outer reality. God watches how you respond when outcomes are delayed, when recognition is absent, when effort seems unnoticed. It is easy to believe when doors open quickly. It is far more powerful to trust when silence surrounds you. In that silence, God is not inactive. God is calibrating your endurance so that what comes next does not overwhelm you. There are seasons when God trains you to carry weight you did not know you could bear. This is not punishment. This is preparation. The higher the frequency, the greater the capacity required to sustain it. God is expanding your emotional strength, sharpening your discernment, and stabilizing your faith. You are becoming someone who does not panic at uncertainty, who does not retreat under pressure, who does not compromise truth for approval. This transformation is not loud, but it is profound. The impossible frequency teaches you that belief is not a reaction to miracles. Belief is the birthplace of miracles. Before circumstances change, perception changes. Before outcomes shift, inner language shifts. God begins by renewing how you interpret reality. Where you once saw threat, you now see opportunity. Where you once saw loss, you now see redirection. Where you once saw delay, you now see strategy. This is not denial of hardship. This is mastery over it. Many people ask God to remove difficulty, but few ask God to increase their capacity. Yet capacity is what determines longevity. God is not merely interested in giving you a moment of victory. God is shaping a life of sustained impact. Temporary success without spiritual stability becomes a burden. That is why God works deeply before working visibly. What others call slow, God calls thorough. What others call hidden, God calls protected. You are beginning to understand that obedience is not a transaction. It is a posture. You do not obey to force God's hand. You obey because you trust God's heart. This trust refines your intentions. You no longer seek outcomes to prove worth. You seek alignment to honor God. And in that surrender, you discover authority. The impossible frequency responds to those who do not chase power, but carry responsibility with reverence. There is also a new level of discernment awakening within you. You sense when something looks right but feels wrong. You recognize when words are polished but empty. God sharpens your perception so that deception loses its influence. This clarity is not meant to isolate you in suspicion, but to anchor you in wisdom. When you walk with discernment, you do not rush decisions or follow crowds. You move deliberately, guided by conviction, rather than pressure. God is teaching you the discipline of restraint. Not every battle requires response. Not every challenge deserves your energy. Not every opinion merits your attention. The impossible frequency is not reactive. It is intentional. Strength is not measured by how much noise you make, but by how firmly you stand. When you no longer feel the need to defend your calling, you reveal confidence rooted in God, not in validation. You may notice that your prayers are changing. They are becoming less about escape and more about purpose. Less about comfort and more about clarity. Less about control and more about trust. This shift signals maturity. God delights in prayers that reflect alignment rather than anxiety. When your heart seeks wisdom over relief, you position yourself for transformation that reaches beyond circumstances. The impossible frequency also confronts fear at its root. Fear survives by exaggerating uncertainty and minimizing God's faithfulness. But when you remember what God has already carried you through, fear loses credibility. Every past rescue becomes evidence. Every previous breakthrough becomes a reminder. God has never failed to remain present. What you face now is not greater than the God who walks with you. You are learning to speak differently, not louder, but truer. Your words are no longer impulsive. They are intentional. You recognize that speech is not just expression, but creation. Words aligned with faith build pathways where none existed. Words shaped by fear erect barriers that do not belong. God honors speech that reflects trust, humility, and courage. When your words align with divine truth, reality begins to respond. There is also a refining happening in how you view success. Success is no longer measured by speed or applause, but by integrity and impact. You are less impressed by appearance and more committed to substance. God is shifting your values so that you do not sacrifice depth for visibility. This grounding protects you from being consumed by comparison. You are no longer running someone else's race. You are honoring the path God designed specifically for you. At times, the weight of responsibility may feel heavy. That is because calling carries consequence. What you say matters. What you do influences others. God is making you aware that your life speaks even when you are silent. This awareness is not meant to intimidate you, but to awaken stewardship. Influence is not about control. It is about example. When your life reflects alignment, it invites others to believe that transformation is possible. You will also face moments when faith demands action without reassurance. Steps taken without guarantees. Decisions made without full clarity. This is where trust becomes tangible. God often reveals direction incrementally so that dependence remains intact. If you saw everything at once, faith would be replaced by certainty and growth would be stunted. Walking by faith keeps your heart soft and your spirit attentive. The impossible frequency trains you to remain steady when outcomes fluctuate. You learn that your identity is not tied to success or failure, but to alignment. Whether doors open quickly or slowly, your confidence remains rooted. God is not testing you to see if you will fail. God is strengthening you so that you will endure. Endurance is not passive waiting. It is active faith sustained over time. There is a sacred tension in this journey, a tension between surrender and boldness, patience and urgency, humility and authority. Holding this balance requires constant alignment. God does not ask you to become extreme. God invites you to become anchored. Anchored people are not easily swayed. They listen before they act. They trust before they demand. They move when prompted, not when pressured. As you continue to walk in this frequency, you may notice that old fears no longer trigger the same response. Old temptations lose their pull. Old narratives lose their power. This is not because you became stronger on your own, but because God redefined what matters to you. When purpose becomes clear, distractions lose their appeal. When calling becomes real, compromise feels empty. The impossible frequency is also an invitation to compassion. Strength without compassion becomes harsh. Authority without empathy becomes oppressive. God shapes your heart so that power is tempered by love and conviction is expressed with grace. You begin to see people not as obstacles or threats, but as souls navigating their own struggles. This perspective does not weaken you, it deepens your impact. You are not meant to rush this process. Depth cannot be hurried. Foundations cannot be rushed. God values sustainability over speed. Every lesson learned now prevents collapse later. Every moment of obedience builds resilience. Every act of trust reinforces alignment. You are not behind. You are not late. You are precisely where refinement produces readiness. Even when progress feels invisible, movement is happening. Roots grow in darkness before fruit appears in light. God works in hidden places because what is formed there cannot be easily stolen or corrupted. When the time comes for visible impact, it will rest on unseen faithfulness. What emerges will not be fragile because it was not rushed. Remain attentive. Remain teachable. Remain faithful. The impossible frequency is not maintained by intensity alone, but by consistency. Small acts of obedience carry immense weight. Quiet trust reshapes reality. Persistent faith redefines limits. You are not required to impress, you are invited to align. And as alignment deepens, clarity sharpens, courage strengthens, and purpose unfolds in ways that continue to reveal just how expansive God's design truly is, how intentional every step has been, how nothing has been wasted, how every moment of surrender has been shaping something far greater than you could have imagined, how every act of trust has been echoing beyond what you can see, and how walking forward with faith, humility, and unwavering dependence continues to open dimensions of understanding, responsibility, and influence that demand not fear, not hesitation, but a steady heart anchored in God. There is a sacred responsibility that comes with this frequency, and it is the responsibility of awareness. Once God opens your perception, ignorance is no longer an option. You become accountable not only for what you know, but for how you live in light of that knowing. This awareness sharpens your conscience. You begin to feel conviction where you once felt comfort. You begin to sense misalignment where you once felt neutrality. This is not heaviness. This is clarity. God is refining your inner compass so that even subtle deviations no longer go unnoticed. You are discovering that faith is not blind optimism. It is informed trust. Trust built on the character of God, not on circumstances behaving favorably. The impossible frequency teaches you to anchor belief in what is unchanging rather than what is unpredictable. Situations fluctuate, emotions rise and fall, opinions shift, but God remains constant. When your confidence is rooted there, instability around you loses its power to dictate your inner state. There will be moments when you are tempted to rush the process, to force outcomes, to accelerate what God is unfolding with precision. In those moments, remember that impatience often disguises itself as ambition. God is not slow. God is exact. Timing is not about delay, it is about alignment. What arrives too early must be sustained by effort. What arrives in divine timing is sustained by grace. Trusting timing is an act of worship, even when anticipation feels intense. The impossible frequency also redefines how you handle disappointment. Disappointment no longer drives you inward toward self-doubt, but upward toward deeper trust. You learn that unmet expectations are not proof of failure, but invitations to refine understanding. God is not obligated to fulfill your plans. God is committed to fulfilling purpose. When plans dissolve, purpose remains. When expectations crumble, calling stands firm. You are being taught the strength of stillness. Stillness is not inactivity, it is attentiveness. In stillness, your spirit learns to listen without panic, to wait without fear, to remain present without control. God often speaks most clearly when urgency is surrendered. Noise clouds discernment, but stillness sharpens it. This is why rushing often leads to regret, while waiting leads to wisdom. There is also a boldness growing within you, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that refuses to retreat. This boldness does not need constant affirmation. It does not crumble under criticism. It does not bend to intimidation. It is rooted in conviction. When you know who God is, you no longer need to prove who you are. Identity anchored in God does not compete. It stands. The impossible frequency exposes false urgency. Not everything that feels urgent is important. Not every demand deserves a response. God teaches you to prioritize with discernment rather than pressure. When your priorities align with divine purpose, peace follows even in demanding seasons. Peace is not the absence of responsibility. It is the presence of trust. You are learning that faith matures through practice, not theory. It is strengthened by daily choices, by unseen obedience, by consistency when motivation fades. God values faithfulness in private more than performance in public. What you do when no one is watching shapes who you become when everyone is. Integrity cultivated in secret produces authority revealed in time. There is also a purification happening in your desires. What once motivated you begins to feel shallow. What once excited you begins to feel insufficient. God is not removing joy. God is refining it. You are learning to desire what lasts, what builds, what aligns. Temporary gratification loses appeal. when eternal purpose becomes clear. This shift protects you from chasing things that cannot satisfy. The impossible frequency invites you into a deeper understanding of trust. Trust is not certainty about outcomes. It is confidence in God's wisdom. You may not know how things will unfold, but you know who governs the unfolding. This assurance stabilizes your heart. Anxiety fades when trust deepens. Fear dissolves when faith matures. You may encounter moments when your obedience seems costly, when doing what is right feels heavier than doing what is easy. These moments state commitment. But understand this: obedience is never wasted. Every sacrifice made in alignment multiplies in impact. God never overlooks faithfulness, even when results are delayed. What looks small now carries weight beyond your awareness. The impossible frequency also challenges how you define strength. Strength is no longer about control, but about surrender. Not surrender to circumstances, but surrender to divine wisdom. When you release the need to control outcomes, you gain the ability to navigate them with clarity. God does not ask you to understand everything. God asks you to trust enough to keep moving. You are also becoming more aware of the power of intention. Actions without intention become empty habits, but actions driven by purpose carry meaning. God is teaching you to act deliberately, to speak thoughtfully, to choose carefully. This intentional living transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for alignment. There will be times when you outgrow environments that once felt familiar. This transition can feel uncomfortable, even painful. But growth often requires separation. God does not remove you to isolate you, but to reposition you. New levels require new surroundings. New responsibilities require new perspectives. Trust the process of repositioning, even when it feels unfamiliar. The impossible frequency also deepens humility. True humility is not self-neglect. It is God awareness. You recognize that every ability, every insight, every opportunity flows from divine generosity. This awareness keeps pride from taking root. Gratitude becomes your anchor. When gratitude leads, entitlement cannot follow. You are learning that faith is sustained by remembrance. Remembering what God has done anchors you when facing what God has not yet revealed. Memory becomes fuel. Testimony becomes strength. Reflection becomes reinforcement. God has carried you before. And that truth becomes a foundation for future trust. There is also an invitation to patience with others. As your understanding deepens, it can be tempting to judge those who have not yet awakened. But patience reflects wisdom. God works with individuals uniquely, at different paces, through different processes. Compassion keeps your heart soft. Soft hearts remain teachable. Hard hearts stagnate. The impossible frequency continues to expand your capacity for hope. Not shallow hope tied to outcomes, but resilient hope rooted in trust. This hope does not collapse under disappointment. It adapts, it endures, it persists. God sustains hope because hope fuels perseverance. As you move forward, you will sense an increasing alignment between belief and action. Faith will no longer remain internal. It will express itself through courage, through integrity, through perseverance. This expression is not for recognition, but for fulfillment. You are becoming someone who lives what they believe. Remain faithful in small things. Remain grounded in truth. Remain open to correction. The impossible frequency thrives where humility and courage coexist. Growth continues where surrender and action align. And as this journey unfolds, every step taken in trust continues to refine your vision, deepen your strength, sharpen your discernment, expand your compassion, and anchor your life more firmly in God, shaping not only what you do, but who you are becoming with every choice, every moment, every act of faith carried forward without retreat, without compromise, without fear. Now listen with your spirit, not just your ears, because moments like this demand response, not reflection alone. What you have heard is not meant to impress you, but to awaken you. God does not stir the depths of your heart so you can return unchanged. This is a holy interruption. This is an invitation to rise out of complacency, out of fear, out of delay, and into alignment. You have heard truth not to admire it, but to live it. What God has revealed to you now places a decision before you. Remain where you are, or step fully into who you are becoming. Examine your life with courage. Look honestly at what you have tolerated that God never required you to carry. Look at the beliefs that have kept you small, the habits that have dulled your sensitivity, the fears that have disguised themselves as wisdom. God is not asking you to condemn yourself. God is calling you to realign yourself. Nothing changes until truth is faced, and nothing heals until surrender is sincere. This is the moment to let go of what no longer agrees with the frequency God has awakened within you. Renew your purpose with intention. Purpose is not something you discover once and forget. It is something you recommit to daily. Let your choices reflect what you say you believe. Let your words carry faith instead of doubt. Let your actions mirror trust instead of hesitation. God honors consistency over intensity, obedience over emotion, and alignment over appearance. You do not need to do everything at once, but you must begin with honesty and continue with faith. Walk closer to God, not out of fear, but out of reverence and love. Closeness is cultivated through surrender, through listening, through obedience when it is inconvenient, and trust when it is costly. Draw near not because you are weak, but because you understand where strength flows from. God is not distant. God responds to hearts that seek with humility and walk with courage. Every step toward alignment strengthens your spirit and sharpens your discernment. Do not leave this moment unchanged. Carry this truth into your decisions, into your relationships, into your private thoughts and public actions. Let faith shape how you respond to pressure. Let trust guide how you face uncertainty. Let gratitude anchor you when outcomes are unclear. God has already proven faithful, and that faithfulness is not finished working in you. Stand firm in what has been awakened. Live as someone who knows that limitation does not have the final word. Fear does not define destiny, and delay does not cancel purpose. You are not walking alone, and you are not walking without direction. Walk with awareness, walk with humility. Walk with faith that does not retreat when challenged. And as you step forward, Let your life declare what your words no longer need to explain, that God is enough. That alignment is powerful, that faith transforms, and that a heart fully surrendered becomes a vessel through which purpose moves, truth stands, and the impossible gives way to what God has already ordained.